Chapter 44. God and Morality. Henry Benford Parks in The Divine Order, Western Culture in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, 1969, makes an excellent observation on the comments by Othello in Shakespeare's Othello. Quote, "When Othello becomes convinced of Desdemona's violation of her marriage vows, he immediately sees this as a threat to all ordered society." End quote. Othello exclaims, quote, "Chaos has come again." We may suppose that Shakespeare was not fully aware of the implicity of Othello's remarks, but the wording makes it inescapably plain that an act of unchastity meant a denial of the whole social order. End quote. Intellectually, this belief is virtually gone. Emotionally, it still is very strong among betrayed men and women. It's curious to find that the reverse opinion is so prevalent, namely, that adultery represents freedom and pleasure, a step outside the world of order and responsibility into a realm of exemption from the necessities and burdens of order. Too often, the adulterer or adulteress chooses an inferior person simply because the relationship is supposedly divorced from all burdens and responsibilities, from mature consequences. The appeal is in its sin more than sex, because their sexual opportunities in marriage were and are not limited. It was and is the burden of a constantly responsible relationship that they sought and seek escape from. To be young again means for them freedom from responsibility. Responsibility means something very different from chaos. Chaos means no consequences, a world without order, hence without aging and judgment. With the rise of Romanticism, both childhood and sin have been seen as a part of a realm outside of responsibility and hence highly desired. An important figure in this contempt is Matthew Arnold, 1822 to 1888. A literary figure given often an undue importance because of his ideas. Full of self-pity, Arnold, like all the Romantics, is a key figure in the development of victimhood. His poem, Dover Beach, is revealing. For Arnold, quote, "The sea of faith," end quote, was at low tide. The implication of this use of tides as a figure is that faith, for Arnold, Christianity, can again be at high tide. Intellectual currents were, for Arnold, all-important. It was not an age of theology. Instead, what had come in was, quote, "the eternal note of readiness," end quote, and Arnold was full of self-pity. Arnold's answer was one fully in tune with the Victorian era. Morality replaced theology. God might be now scientifically untenable as a hypothesis, but morality seemed to divide the races and the nations. National power and excellence came with morality, and the advanced nations were above, quote, "the lesser breeds without the law," end quote, to use Kipling's phrase, because of their moral law. This shift from theology to morality helps explain an interesting fact. The rise of the Salvation Army led to much hostility. Some early Salvation Army members were not only mobbed, but killed. But the Salvation Army met with the approval in a number of countries of local royalty and intellectuals who sought to further the shift from theology to morality in so doing. The Salvation Army was, after all, famous for its good works. The Victorian age did believe in morality even when it failed to observe it. The eternal order had shifted from theology to morality, but in its very origins, Romanticism had also abandoned morality, the Marquis de Sade in particular. The element of perversity quickly appeared in Romantic literature. Most, however, replaced theology with a belief in the absoluteness of morality. Morality, however, is an aspect of theology. God, as the Creator, has given a necessary moral order to all creation. Moral order is an aspect of theological order, and it soon erodes without it. In belief, this means no God, no morality. Without God, every man is his own source of law and morality. With this in mind, we can better understand Othello's comment, "Chaos has come again," or in Parkes's words, quote, "An act of unchastity meant the denial of the whole social order," end quote. The Victorians who, like Arnold, substituted the moral law for God were soon succeeded by Victorians who ridiculed, quote, "the middle class," end quote, meaning Christian and evangelical, and its preoccupation with morality and sin. Morality for them was no longer associated with God, but neither was it a part of personal behaviour. The state had replaced God, and the English philosophers of idealism were radically statist. The moral realm was now the social and statist realm. It was this era that gave rise to the social gospel. Since then, the moral issues have become socialistic ones, environmental causes, and so on and on. Morality is now socially defined, not theologically. Instead of having reference to a cosmic supernatural order, to God, morality is now identified in terms of the natural order, Mother Earth, or Gaia. But this creates a problem. A valid and legitimate order rests on an accepted belief in ultimacy, an ultimate power in law. The vicious disorder in the Renaissance Italian city-states was due to an absence of valid law and power. Torture had been common to the late Roman Empire. Its legitimacy was denied by Christendom, and it was slowly abolished only to return full force with the Renaissance. Since 1914, and especially since 1949, it has again returned to the Western world because the legitimacy of God's law has been questioned. The question of legitimacy and law was never solved by Islam, and over the centuries, power has been maintained by brute force, so that terrorism has been basic to those in power and those out of power. Europe, in the late Middle Ages, by turning from biblical to Roman premises, created centralized and autocratic regimes also. In England, the Tudor break with Rome had deeper roots than are normally recognized. The Tudors had no standing army. They were militarily inept and foolish. They had no large bureaucracy, and they were dependent on local officials. They did have, however, a strong basis of popular support, whether we like it or not. It's significant that, whereas medieval art sought to depict God's order, Renaissance art began the long shift from God's order to nature as a subject of art. A new priority was being revealed. Not the Last Judgment, but the royal will came to be stressed, and this culminated in a depiction finally of Louis XIV as the god Zeus. The artists were now the new seers, and financial support that once went to monks shifted to the new prophets, the artists. Romanticism very clearly made the artist the source of man's new revelations, whatever they were. In Walt Whitman, this view of the artist as prophet-saviour was clearly expressed. But where was the law? For Walt Whitman, it seemed to be a mindless affirmation of democracy, free sexuality, especially for homosexuals, and not much more than the pious gushing of humanistic platitudes. Instead of, "Chaos is come again," to cite again Othello's words, for to many moderns, the conclusion was, "Freedom is come again." The liberation of man was accomplished by the abandonment of God's law, but the prison house that was closing about Wordsworth's new and quote-unquote free mankind was a prison of humanism, totalitarianism, amoral and lawless. The appeal to a basic order is inescapable in a fallen world. It can be to a future order, such as the Great Society, a humanistic goal which gives us the glorified city of man, or it can be to a God-ordained order, the city of God. However much humanism proclaims an acceptance of nature, it cannot rest content with nature as it is. It seeks to conserve or to improve in it, to restore it or to protect it, but it is critical in some sense. The status quo is never enough. But from whence the norm? Ultimately, this becomes for most a personal judgment. Quote-unquote science or evolutionary hypotheses supply many norms, and there is no common assent nor a given text such as the Bible. But we are assured that chaos will indeed come in again if we do not heed the messages of our humanistic saviours. They who have despised biblical morality have given to us, via the modern state, new laws going into tens of thousands of volumes, whereby man is to be saved, and there is still no end to these salvationist laws. These laws are unread even by those who pass them, for who can read over 2,000 pages of often contradictory statements, and they are unreadable? They speak more of chaos than of order.